I would love to see a time where we don't even have to get injured enough to have to replace the whole joint, but that we can continue to, put a pothole filler of cartilage over those defects and kind of move towards joint preservation
Right.
to an extent that we don't have to have these catastrophic failures of our joints that require replacement. But restoration and replacement can go hand in hand. And I love the idea of kind of a living one-stop body shop.
Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Bob Hariri from Piloting Health. And today I've got a really great opportunity to talk with someone that I really admire, Dr. Nina Tandon, the CEO of EpiBone, one of the cool rising companies in the regenerative medicine space. And Nina and I share kind of a common background from our time at Columbia University. Nina is an electrical engineer and a stem cell and regenerative medicine scientist who has been recognized and celebrated as one of the great young entrepreneurs in this field. And so, Nina, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Well, as you know, the two of us bumped into each other at a conference about 2 weeks ago, and because we share a common objective of turning living products and cellular-derived products and biomaterial-derived products into tools to really change the treatment of some of these chronic diseases that affect the musculoskeletal system, and in other areas, we recognize that this is a perfect opportunity to potentially find ways to work together, collaborate, and that's one of the things I hope we can do going forward. But what I want to do for the audience is get them to understand exactly what you're doing at EpiBone. So can you share with us how you first got interested in doing this and what the objective of your company is?
Wow. I mean, yeah, I think the field of regenerative medicine, it takes a real village because it's such an interdisciplinary field. And, I came in as an engineer, and then later as a recovered management consultant. Um, and, uh, and I think, the goal for EpiBone is to transform the standard of care around skeletal reconstruction. We all know that the tenets of reconstructive surgery are just center on replacing like with like. And bone is the most transplanted human material after blood. As a society, we're replacing millions of joints per year just because of a couple millimeters of damaged cartilage. And, as a society, we're sitting on a bit of a ticking time bomb because we're getting injured earlier in life. We're living longer and longer. We need our implants to last as long as we do. So, how can we do differently? And what do we do differently? I like to think we're part of a kind of second wave of regenerative medicine companies that use stem cells and not just deliver them as cells, and but rather use stem cells plus biomaterials plus bioreactors to essentially mimic the natural conditions of tissue development. So just like we need diet and exercise inside our bodies for our stem cells to do their best work, we try and mimic that environment and those cues using cell culture robotic systems that we've developed, using proprietary cell culture media cocktails that we've developed, all in service of trying to do something natural.
That's what I've always admired. First of all, we share a common engineering background,
Mm-hmm.
and engineers are always the best problem solvers when it comes to problems in medicine.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I see it. And at Cellularity, we've been following what you've been doing, and recognize that you yourself have realized that it's virtually any tissue, but bone is a perfect example of a template, a scaffold
Mm-hmm.
that's populated by a cellular living element.
Yes.
And you can find ways through bioreactors and so on to mimic what the natural process of bone and cartilage
Mm-hmm.
construction is, but do it in an easy to deploy tool set that an orthopedic surgeon can use. Give us a sense of your pathway to getting to where you're already now making these cartilage and bone constructs in
Yes.
your laboratory.
Yeah.
So how long did it take you to get there?
Gosh, so I know that our PhD advisors were working on this 20 years before we came on the scene, my co-founder and I, and we started about 20 years ago. And I am actually a bit of a generalist. I started out as an electrical engineer, and I was interested in electrically active tissues, tissues like, well, cardiac specifically, and neuron, and even skin. But when we think about the range of complexities of tissues, which I think you just alluded to, what are some of the simplest tissues out there? Well, and I think they represent the first wave: skin,
Yeah.
flat, single cell type, right? So we saw the first skin tissue engineered products in the early 2000s. On the other hand, I think when we're thinking about, how do we replace organs, it's probably going to not be a challenge for tissue engineering to meet in order to make, cardiac, or to make hearts, or to make kidneys. And that might not be a popular statement to say, but I think that's maybe beyond what tissue engineering will do in the near term. Bone and cartilage are interesting because they're complex tissues in terms of shape, but we can solve for that using digital fabrication. And we can use a single cell type and get pretty far. In our case, mesenchymal stem cells from either bone marrow or adipose. Obviously, very intrigued by what you've been able to show at Cellularity with placental derived cells. The mesenchymal stem cells make bone and cartilage really readily.
Right.
And so, if we can solve for the transport issues, that our capillary beds in our bodies deliver lots of nutrients to cells, if we can solve for that using robotic cell culture systems, and solve for the shape using digital fabrication, I mean, basically we're using all of these deep tech solutions to just create this very ultimately natural product. At the end of it, it's bone, it's cartilage.
And I always appreciated the fact that there's a convergence in several technology sectors,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you're taking advantage of everything that's been known in the 3D printing world, for
Yes.
example, and you're applying it with your particular raw materials.
Yep.
And I love that. And the fact that being successful in creating the new bone and cartilage replacement products is going to lend credence to going after the more complicated tissues. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Kidney and heart may be maybe a decade farther
Yeah.
down the stream, because we don't necessarily understand all of the embryologic pathways that lead
I
to
would agree
normal.
with that
Yeah,
statement.
yeah,
Yeah, we don't understand the developmental biology enough, I think, to be able to, as engineers, and I love what you said about engineers, to turn what we know from whether it's developmental biology or wound healing into a playbook that engineers can then implement
right.
using sensors and actuators and all of our toolkits. So I think that's true. And multiple cell types, and highly metabolically active cells. I mean, it's a tall order.
Right. And you've been able to do this with cells sourced from different places,
Yeah.
adipose derived. Have you done any work with iPSCs?
In the academic setting, not and in the academic setting as well, with cord blood derived stem cells as well. When it came time for us to spin out our company, and we did that 10 years ago, we wanted to choose a cell type that, and I'd be really curious your thoughts about this too. How to kind of pick your lane in terms of that trade off between innovation and simplicity, innovation and therefore regulatory risk. And we kind of have come up with our own philosophy of, to describe this, where you want to be the most innovative when you're in academia because you want to publish, you want to be novel. And then when it came to, okay, how are we going to get
Yeah.
this? This is going to be the first time the FDA has approved stem cells to be used this way. So how do we make their job easy? How do we, and we knew that MSCs, whether from, adipose or bone marrow, had been used in a lot of mostly failed clinical trials in the cardiovascular space, but actually that had kind of shown these cells were really safe. They're not going to go off script. So we thought to ourselves, this is going to be a good starting stem cell population. We know they're efficacious in this setting, and we also know they're not going to be as scary from the FDA's perspective.
Very good point. And let's face it, folks like us who are trying to, as you put it, innovate, we have to be practical too, right? So,
Yeah.
you can get really fancy in the laboratory, right?
I mean, don't we love to get fancy?
Absolutely. And those are the great papers that everybody loves, and
Yeah.
they cite repeatedly and so on. But the bottom line is, I see the regulatory process as a series of building blocks, right?
Yeah.
You get the most lowest common denominator form of the product, get it into the clinic, get enough adoption, early adoption, and build a data set of
Yeah.
clinical experience. And then from there, you say, okay, we were successful, for example, maybe with an osteochondral type thing. And for the audience, osteochondral products are when you have severe damage to cartilage, and you need to fix that hole basically.
Mhm.
You can't build the cartilage unless you have an underlying bone component. Can
Yeah.
you explain that?
Yeah, it's no part of our body exists in isolation. And oftentimes when people have injured joints, it's the cartilage is missing, but it's the bone that hurts.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I as an engineer, I don't think I quite appreciated um gosh, it's the bone not only serves as a structural element, but it also serves as a kind of differentiation cue
Hmm.
for those for those cells. The growing cartilage on top of bone gives you better cartilage and also delivers the cartilage in a better way to the joint because it's an anchor. It's almost like an IKEA dowel, I sometimes think of it as,
Hmm.
that kind of holds that tissue in place. And you kind of do need the bone and cartilage together in our bodies, so we grow them together outside the body first.
That's a great description, because the fact is, as in virtually every organ, every tissue and organ, there is a fundamental need for the cooperation, right, of
Yeah.
two potentially very different cell types,
Yeah.
but that they work in unison to provide a function, a physiologic or anatomic function. And cartilage, obviously, we all know it as the kind of the protecting end of the bone that provides kind of a soft, lubricated surface for joint activity. But that's the stuff that gets damaged, and we've yet to figure out the best way to repair it with, for
Yeah.
example, cell
It's
therapy.
the holy grail.
Although it's coming, I think it's
I
coming.
think it's
And
coming.
by the way, your
If we have
work
something to do with it, maybe,
and
but that'd
and
be even better.
and your work is going to actually pave the way for treating these problems even earlier, by showing that it's the cells that are going to remodel the fundamental platform, whether it's the bone platform or that little osteochondral platform you create in your bioreactors. So so we both share the belief that regenerative medicine is an inevitability in healthcare, right? Because it's biologically intuitive that you fix problems by replacing problems.
Hmm.
And I use the aviation analogy. When you understand what the mission critical parts are, how and when they fail, you can develop a strategy to preempt the failure.
Yeah.
You ever see a day when, if we push with with life force and all the other activities, we push life expectancy to 120, it's inevitable that we're going to wear out our joints. Do you ever feel that there'd be a possibility that you actually replace joints before they fail?
Absolutely.
Wouldn't that be
Truly.
cool?
Wouldn't that be cool? And I think that's the future we want to live in because, when people don't usually, when they think about how, oh gosh, I don't know if I want to live till 120, it's usually because they're imagining some aches and pains.
Absolutely.
And when people say quality of life, I don't think that necessarily captures the existential pain that people feel when they don't feel like they have control over the pain we feel in our bodies. I mean,
And
skeletal,
the loss of
the
function
loss
and
of function,
performance,
the
right?
loss of joie de vivre, from being able to like pick your grandkids up,
Go dancing.
go dancing, and skeletal. I think we're also starting to learn, speaking of like the interconnectedness of various parts of the body, that skeletal health is mental health.
Yeah, yeah,
There's the blood, the bone brain axis.
yeah, yeah.
So I think, I would love to see a time when, I think what you were saying, I would love to see that come true, where we don't even have to get injured enough to have to replace the whole joint, but that we can continue to, put a pothole filler of cartilage over those defects and kind of move towards joint preservation
Right.
to an extent that we don't have to have these catastrophic failures of our joints that require replacement. But restoration and replacement can go hand in hand. And I love the idea of kind of a living one-stop body shop. Yeah.
I mean, listen, in airplanes, we know landing gear lasts just so long.
Right.
Before it fails and you have a bad accident, you replace the landing gear. We could do the
Exactly.
same
That's
thing.
like what our knees are. They're our landing gear.
Absolutely. I often say that healthy extended lifespan, healthy longevity, really falls down to four things in my mind. Preservation of high performance mobility,
Mhm.
which is so dependent upon what you do, high performance cognition, high performance immunity, and youthful aesthetics. So you actually hit two of those quite nicely. The
Mhm.
aesthetic side, because bones and joint structure and function is part of our aesthetic,
Right.
and clearly the if you can preserve your joints and preserve your bones, particularly bones that may be subjected to injury like fractures and so on and so forth, you will ultimately preserve mobility, which is associated with metabolic benefits. For example, muscle can't exist without bones,
Right.
right? And without functioning joints. Muscle is one of the most synthetic organs in the body. The myokinome contributes to better mental health, for example.
Right.
So what you're doing is going to touch upon all elements of what healthy extended lifespan really is all about. So Nina, let me ask you this. Coming from your vantage point, you've dedicated your life and career to this. You're not just a scientist. You're not just kind of a research egghead like I am to some extent, but you are an entrepreneur. You are a business person. You've actually had professional business experience as a consultant and so on. In light of everything you've been doing over the last decade, what's the grand vision for you and for EpiBone, both?
I mean, that's a bit of a philosophical question because I feel like in a way, more than a business, I don't know how it feels like for you. But it feels like a calling.
Yeah,
It feels like a duty. I feel like this is work that needs to be done. And, you look to your left and you look to your right, and there's not that many people in the world who are equipped to connect these dots. And in terms of the grand vision, I just would love to be an extra in the movie towards creating a world where we can be our own medicine, where we don't have to replace parts of ourselves with metal and plastic. We can find, better access than innate healing capacities that our bodies have. And, when you ask me my grand vision, I'm not sure it's mine alone. And I don't think that it's mine alone to execute on. I think there's a bit, you alluded to this earlier. I think there's more of it takes a village to raise a startup, but I think it takes maybe a merry band of misfits like ourselves to, collaborate, conspire, and create this world together
yeah.
because there's so many different pieces of the puzzle that we've all been kind of solving on our own. And when I look at the landscape, whether it's the regulatory landscape or the business landscape, I'm not sure that the legacy players in this space are incentivized to see the same future that maybe we want to see.
That's a
So
really good point.
I wonder, I think there's maybe a future where we collaboratively, rather than individualistically, create this future because we've each solved parts of the puzzle, and I think to the extent that we work together, I think we can realize this vision where we can have a more pain-free, more organic approach to healing the body
I
that
like
that
the
works with what we have.
I like how you say that because I've always seen cellular medicine, regenerative medicine is very intuitively logical because it is the way nature intended to fix things. And it's very funny. I was thinking about another element of all this, which is, you and I are both, entrepreneurs who built stuff from the ground up. Elon Musk has a really great interview where he said that people always think starting up a company is a lot of fun, all fun and really easy,
Sure.
but he describes it beautifully. He says, you know what, building a company is like staring into the abyss while chewing glass, and he describes it as you're staring into the abyss because as a CEO and a startup CEO, you spend most of your time dealing with the stuff you don't want to have to deal with, the problems, the fundraising, the regulatory issues, et cetera, et cetera. And the chewing on glass is that it takes you away from the things you want to do, which is to be sitting there thinking and collaborating with your scientists and innovating and interacting with colleagues in other companies in other fields. And we don't often get the opportunity to do that. So I'd like you to tell us two things about yourself that equipped you to be the CEO that you are, and Any funny stories from your experience in building EpiBone? I think one of the elements
Yeah.
that I love is your co-founder. His nickname is Ick,
Yeah.
which is a great name for medicine. You
Yeah,
know.
I know, I know. I mean, gosh, I never thought I would have. I know, if you told little child version of me that this would be what I'm doing with my life, I would have been like, no way, stop it. But I think what really motivated me to get into this field was, I mean, I grew up with in a large family, uh,
Where'd you grow up?
New York City,
Where?
Roosevelt Island,
You're kidding.
and I
I'm
lived.
from Queens.
I know, I know. I feel like there's this New York element with some of our little tribe here. And so I grew up on Roosevelt Island and one of four kids. And when we were little, we discovered that my brother had a degenerating eye disease called retinitis pigmentosa that runs in my family, and that my two sisters, pretty rare for this to happen, but my two sisters are red-green colorblind. And so we all, and I, this, both of these genetic mutations skipped over me, and, or genetic conditions. And so it was really clear that, oh my goodness, I mean, I was really philosophical about this. How do we know how anyone else sees the world kind of questions, and being really aware that sometimes it can be the differences with which we can, that something as miraculous as perception can be, can also be fallible, because the biotechnology, the technology of our body is miraculous and also fallible, just like any other technology we were born with. And so the ophthalmologist that treated us when we were little said, "Don't worry, there's a team at MIT that's working on retinitis pigmentosa. It'll be cured in your lifetime." And so a seed was planted, and I thought to myself, "Well, I'm going to join that team one day." And I did. And in the meantime, the Human Genome Project happened, and and so maybe this single base pair deletion in our DNA, which caused this blindness in my family, might have a better cure at the genetic level. We would call this Occam's razor, like the most simple way to solve something. And so I didn't think that my engineering expertise would end up being used towards more of a generalist way of treating the body and sort of kind of growing tissue from scratch, so to speak. And so it's been really miraculous, and just a lot of twists and turns.
How
There've
did you
been,
wind up in Jersey City for your company?
well, New Jersey, I mean, maybe you can appreciate this. This could be our plug for New Jersey, but we scoured up and down the country. And New Jersey, of course, is a kind of historical epicenter for the pharma industry.
Yeah.
But what I think that New Jersey has done really well has been to foster this next wave of biotechnology companies. I mean, the suite of incentives here are kind of, people don't believe it. We can sell, as a pre-revenue company, we can sell our net operating losses on an open exchange. There's an evergreen angel investors get 20% cash back from investing in companies like us. And there's manufacturing voucher program. And what's the last one? The Evergreen Fund, where investors get matched up to $5 million per round of funding for us. So, when I ran into Chris Christie at a hockey game once, I couldn't stop myself from saying, that net operating loss program is really ingenious for early stage companies. And I almost was like, I can't believe how excited I am to talk about this. But it predates him, actually. I think it's 3 or 4 governors old. But it's a huge suite of incentives that I've seen nowhere else in the country. And, it makes me proud to be a New Jersey-based company.
So, considering where you are in the development of your company, what do you consider the biggest challenge that you've had to face to get here? And what gives you optimism that you're going to be able to overcome all these issues and get to the end game?
Wow. Well, I wonder if you can appreciate this. I mean, having a background like yourself in aviation, but biotechnology is not quite as capital intensive as aviation, but it's I mean, it almost looks like a nonprofit or a social venture when you're talking about 10, 15 years of essentially doing research and development before you have a product you can sell. And a lot of that is because that of those economics tie back to regulatory hurdles which are I'm very proud of how difficult it is to get a product approved for clinical use here. And I think that that makes me proud of the fact that we've now gotten to what are called investigational new drugs approved for clinical use here in the US. Um, but I think protecting patients in terms of safety is, while it's a lofty goal, if we take too imbalanced of an approach, may unintendedly have a side effect of preventing some of those technologies from ever being able to prove efficaciousness because they run out of money for, the life cycle of developing a product might be longer than an economic cycle.
Right.
Okay, so what's been interesting, I think, in this post-COVID world that we find ourselves in now, is that a lot of geographies around the world have upgraded their clinical trial infrastructure in order to handle the vaccines and testing them effectively. And the healthcare market has gone global.
Yeah.
And so it's been fascinating for me to think about, well, how do we think more globally? And also, is there an opportunity? And I think as an engineer, this is very exciting for me because I think, taken that typical engineering mentality of, well, our research and development and creativity is all in our product. But I think the moment now that's demanded of us is to innovate on the business model as well in
Yeah.
tandem.
I couldn't agree with you more. People don't recognize that once you launch your company, CEOs spend a tremendous amount of their time worrying about fuel. How
Right.
long can you fuel the enterprise? Can you get it all the way through to a regulatory conclusion? Because again, our objectives is to put our intellectual capital behind something that's going to actually get to patients and help them. So it is a challenge, and hopefully you and I can talk about this again, maybe in another one of these interviews and podcasts, where we can talk about your next round of successes, and hopefully our industry, our field, will start to figure out that cooperation, collaboration, and consolidation may make it easier for us to all get the capital we need, get the talent we need, and maybe also drive the regulatory community to help us get these things across the finish line. What do you think ignited this passion in you?
I mean, I don't know. If I look back when I was a little kid, I had a really hard time. No, if someone asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? I think a lot of people have difficulty answering that question, but I feel like people vote with their feet. And the things I most liked to do were, I mean, I loved reading books. I loved writing poetry. I loved sewing clothes, and I loved, doing community theater. And so I guess I was, like most kids, a bit maybe precocious and kind of like doing a lot of things. And I think a lot of our young women are really similar. They don't necessarily dislike math and science, but they like a lot of things.
Yeah, that's actually a good point.
And
Yeah.
what my father said to me, I'm one of three sisters. We also have a brother. And his mom, my grandma, had also really enjoyed math when she was little, but and came from a progressive family in India, but math was just not in her destiny. It wasn't considered ladylike enough for her. And yet her younger brother became a professor at Columbia in math, studied with Einstein here in New Jersey at the Institute for Advanced Study.
Wow.
And I think somewhere in his mind, and in my mind, I can't help but wonder, what if what about her? Like, what could she have done if that had been open to her? And so I remember my father saying to me, "You're good at math and science, so it's important for you to do math and science."
That's wonderful. I think it's incumbent upon all of us to encourage the young women in our lives to think that there's no boundaries to getting involved in this. And by the way, in my world of aviation, have you noticed the number of women pilots flying the
I
airliners these
have.
days? It's
I
spectacular, you
love it.
know?
I'm always like, "Yay."
By the way, not to bring up the Boeing situation, but if you've noticed
Yeah.
some of the problems with aircraft, uh, some of the most heroic saves in aviation that we've been seeing have been female
That
pilots.
woman who landed in the East River.
Well, she
I
wasn't you're thinking about Sully?
Yeah.
That was a guy,
Oh,
but
why did I think it was a woman pilot? Anyway.
the Southwest jet that lost a window, had a explosive decompression. That was a female aviator, former military
Right, I
pilot,
must be
who
conflating
landed.
those stories because, sometimes as an entrepreneur, I think to myself, "Okay, we gotta land this plane. We gotta fly and I
Absolutely,
don't even know how to fly,
absolutely.
right? I
Uh,
wonder if you have
I'm,
those analogies in your mind."
believe me, I worry every day about having a ditch. But in any event, I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with me. It's been wonderful. I'm looking forward to finding ways to work together. And I want to tell everybody that you should take a look at what EpiBone is doing, because it's going to impact our lives in the very near future. Everything from treating our kind of the joints wear out, but I'm trying to talk Nina into making sure we can use this for dental implants, because we're all going to need those too. So, Nina, thank you so much
Thank
for
you so
joining me. And
much.
this is Bob Hariri, and I want to thank you for watching this episode of Piloting Health.